Good evening, dear insomniac. Come in, and don't mind the noise. There's a storm sitting over the meadow tonight, proper thunder, the rolling sort that arrives late and takes its time about leaving. It's been going round in circles out there for an hour, like something that's lost its keys. I'm rather enjoying it, if I'm honest. It can't get in. That's the whole pleasure of it. Take the chair nearest the fire. It's dry, and you're not, and I'd rather you were. There. Now. I found tonight's story somewhere it had no business being, and that's most of why I love it. I'd been down in the old stock, going through a shelf I'd let go far too long, and I pulled out a ledger, an enormous one, bound in board, thick as a doorstep, and full, cover to cover, hundreds of pages, of grain prices, bushels and weights and what somebody paid for barley in a year nobody remembers. I very nearly put it straight back. I'd got as far as sliding it onto the shelf, and a corner of the end paper had lifted. So I opened it up again, and turned to the back, and there, written small and close, in a hand that wanted to fit, was a story. 14 pages of it, filling the blanks at the end of the driest book in this entire library. Somebody hid it there. That's the only explanation I've ever arrived at. Somebody wrote down a story they wanted kept, and then looked around for the single place on earth no living soul would ever go looking, and chose the barley accounts. And they were nearly right. Only nearly. It took me a very long while to find it, and I only found it by accident. And I've thought about that person a great deal since. I've copied it out onto decent paper and left the original exactly where it was, because it seems to me that's what they wanted. So settle back and let the thunder do whatever it likes. This one's called What the Mountain Kept. There is a stretch of high country in the north called Astor's Reach, a run of grey peaks above a pass, named for the small purple flowers that grow up there in numbers that make no sense given how little else does. And in Astor's Reach, in a mountain hollowed out like a fist, there lived a dragon. Everybody knew about it. That was rather the trouble. It had been there 800 years, and in that time it had gathered a horde that had become, without any effort on its part, the most famous pile of objects in the known world. Gold to the ceiling, the stories said. Crowns of 9 kingdoms. A ruby the size of a sheep. A cup that granted wishes. And so, for 800 years, people had gone up the mountain to take it. Almost none of them came back. The knights went first, because knights always go first, up in polished plate with banners and squires, certain each time that the difference this time was them. The mountain kept them. Then the sellswords, and the famous burglars, and the second sons with something to prove. The mountain kept them too. Now and again it let one go, sent a single survivor back down the pass, grey-faced and wordless, to carry the tale to the bottom. The dragon understood something its challengers never did, that a warning only works if someone lives to deliver it, and that a wall of stone frightens people less than one shaking man who has seen what's at the top. The histories are careful about the details, in the way histories go careful when the truth is bad for morale. The ballads are less careful, and the ballads are why every child in the north knew, by the age of 6, that you did not go up the pass at Astor's Reach, not for gold, not for glory, not for anything. 3 armies tried, across 3 centuries. The pass is narrow, and a narrow pass is a bad place to bring 1,100 men against something that has spent 800 years learning the ground. None of the 3 campaigns concluded as intended, which is the phrase the record keepers settled on. The last one settled the matter for good. After that, kings stopped sending armies and started sending ambassadors, and the ambassadors came back with nothing but the firm and lasting impression that the creature simply wanted to be left alone, and would see to it personally if pressed. So the whole grim business had settled into a kind of trade. The town at the foot of the pass, Bellwater, a damp little place, lived almost entirely off the people who came to try. It sold them rope and boots and provisions and maps at prices that reflected the survival rate. It took their names. And when the dragon was finished, it would carry down whatever was left of them and set it, without ceremony, at the second waymarker, the packs, the boots, the belongings, sorted and stacked. And Bellwater would come up and collect it and sell it on and enter the names in a book kept for exactly that purpose. Nobody in Bellwater was proud of this, but it was the trade. And the trade fed the town, and if the fools would keep coming, somebody was going to profit, and it might as well be the people who'd told them not to. The dragon's own opinion of all this had never been recorded. Nobody had ever got close enough, or lived long enough, to ask. Which brings us to a boy named Wick. Wick was 13, small for it, and a thief. Not the way a person falls into it now and then, but the way a person is a carpenter. It was his trade, and he was extremely good at it, which he'd have told you himself without any pride, because he had precisely nothing else and had learned early that he couldn't afford modesty about the one thing he had. He had no family, not a lost one, not a tragic one. None. He'd been left at Bellwater as a baby, the way parcels are left and passed through the hands of people who were paid to have him until the paying stopped. By 9, he was working for a woman called Mother Kell, who bought stolen things and sold them on, and who fed him adequately, and never once, in 4 years, asked him a single question about himself. He'd got used to it. That's the part that ought to catch at you. He had done the arithmetic of his own life quite early and quite carefully, and it had come out to almost nothing, and he had not been especially troubled by that, because he had no other figure to hold it up against. He knew about the dragon, of course. He'd picked more pockets at the send-off parties for doomed expeditions than anywhere else in town. Rich men in high spirits with their minds on glory, made for easy work. And he'd never once felt bad about it, reasoning that the mountain was going to take everything off them soon enough anyway. And then, one autumn evening, Wick made the only real mistake of his career. There was a lord passing through, a real one, with an escort and an errand, and Wick lifted a brooch off him in the crush outside the inn. Gold, heavy, set with a green stone the size of a thumbnail, and he had it away clean, and was 3 streets gone before he understood what he'd actually taken. Not a brooch, a badge of office. It meant something, and its loss would be answered for. And there was a description of a small, dark-haired boy going round Bellwater within the hour. Mother Kell wouldn't touch it. One look, and she told him he was an idiot and shut the door. So Wick ran. He ran, because there was nowhere in Bellwater to hide, and the only road out of Bellwater goes up, and he was above the second waymarker on the pass road, past the neat, dreadful stacks of other people's belongings, though he was moving too fast in the dark to notice them, when the storm came over the top of the mountains and found him. It was a bad one. He'd not have lasted the night in the open, and he was too tired and too cold to pretend otherwise, when the lightning went off overhead and showed him the entrance. He knew what it was at once. Everybody in Bellwater knew what it was. There were engravings of it on the maps they sold to the doomed. A great split in the rock, wide as a barn door, the wind moaning across it. Wick stood in the rain and looked at it, and did the arithmetic one last time. Down the mountain, the watch and the Lord's men, and a rope. That badge was worth a hanging, and everybody involved knew it. Up the mountain, the thing that had eaten armies. And here is what the tellers got wrong afterwards, when there were tellers. They said he was brave. He wasn't. He walked in because he'd run the sums on his own life 1,000 times, and they still came out to almost nothing. And a boy who is genuinely certain that no one anywhere will grieve him is a boy who has already lost the thing that makes a mountain frightening. He wasn't defying death. He'd simply stopped being able to find the part of himself that was supposed to mind it. Dying warm seemed, on balance, an improvement on dying wet, and there was nobody down the mountain who'd know the difference either way. So he went in. The passage ran a long way back, and then opened out, and Wick came round a shoulder of rock and stopped. The stories had it wrong. There was gold, a great deal of it, drifts and slides of it, glinting in a low red light from somewhere he couldn't see. But the gold was only the loudest part. What there actually was, filling a chamber the size of a cathedral, was everything. Crowns, yes, armour, coin, cups, but heaped in among it and all through it, a wooden horse with 3 legs, a ship's nameplate, a bell without a clapper, 60 or 70 umbrellas, a set of false teeth, a wedding ring so small it could only ever have fitted a child, a rocking horse, bundles of letters tied with string, thousands of them, going back and back, a boot. It looked less like a treasure hoard than like the contents of every attic that had ever existed, poured into a mountain and left to settle. And in the middle of it, coiled round twice with no obvious end, lay the dragon. It was black-green, like a deep pond. Its scales were as big as roof slates, and worn smooth at the edges, the way old stone stairs go smooth. Its head, resting on a drift of coin, was longer than a cart. It was, without any exaggeration, the largest living thing Wick had ever seen or would ever see. And it had one eye open, and the eye was already on him. "No," said the dragon. Wick did not move. "No," it said again. Its voice came up through the floor and out of the walls and arrived from every direction at once. It was enormous, and it was also, Wick noticed this immediately, and it was the most important thing he ever noticed in his life. Tired. Bone tired. The voice of something that had done a terrible thing many hundreds of times and had never once enjoyed it. "Whatever your speech is, consider it delivered," it said. "Whatever your claim, consider it denied. I am old, and it is late, and I have grown very weary of what happens next. Go back down the mountain, boy, and I will pretend I did not see you, which is the only mercy this place has left in it." Wick stayed exactly where he was. "I told you to go down." "There's men down there," said Wick. The eye narrowed. "There are always men down here soon enough. I am giving you the chance almost none of them get. Take it. These ones are for me, down there, waiting." A pause. The great head lifted a little off the coin, which made a sound like a beach. "You are a child." 13. "They are sending children now," the dragon said, not to him, but to the dark, in the flat disbelief of a creature that had thought it was past being disappointed by anyone. "Nobody sent me," said Wick. "I'm hiding." From what? He considered lying. which was his native language, and found he hadn't the energy for the grammar. "Hanging," he said, and the dragon looked at him for a long moment out of that single enormous eye, and whatever it had expected a person to smell of, coming into its mountain, it plainly wasn't finding it on this one. No greed, no glory, no plan. Just a cold, thin, unfrightened boy who had already, somewhere on the way up, made peace with not going home. The great head went back down onto the coin. "The alcove on the left is dry," it said. "Do not touch anything. Do not speak to me. If you are still here at dawn, I will carry you down the mountain myself and put you somewhere the rope will not find you, and I will not explain to you why, because I do not intend to work it out." And it shut its eye. Wick sat in the dry alcove with his knees up and his back to the stone, and thought about the badge in his pocket, because that was still a problem. Alive by dawn was one thing. Alive by dawn with a hanging offence in his coat was another, and he looked out at that vast glittering slope of gold and rubbish, and the professional part of his brain, the only part that had ever earned him anything, lit up like a struck match. There is no safer place in the entire world to hide a stolen gold brooch, it told him, than on top of 10,000 tons of stolen-looking gold. He waited a full hour to be sure. Then he crept out, chose a spot, a shoulder of coin halfway up, unremarkable, pushed the badge down into it until it vanished, smoothed it over, crept back, and slept like the dead. He was woken by the voice coming up through the floor. "You have hidden stolen goods in my hoard." Wick's eyes opened. Grey light in the passage. Morning. He was alive. "You've got room," he said. There was a silence long enough for him to review the whole remainder of his life. Then the dragon said, in a tone he couldn't read, "Left-hand slope, 2/3 up, under the pewter." "Yes, you did that well," it said, with what sounded like genuine personal irritation. "I have watched a famous burglar work in this chamber. I did not let him leave it. He was noisier than you." Wick sat up properly. "You knew where I put it." "I know where every object in this room is," said the dragon. "I know where every object in this room came from. There are 400,000 of them. It is not a difficult skill. It is only a very large one." A pause. "Yours is the newest thing in here by 90 years, and it is under my pewter. And I find, this morning, that I mind that a great deal less than I minded the last person who came in uninvited. Go away before I remember what I usually am." He came back 11 days later. He'd tell people much later that he'd had reasons. He had a whole list and could deliver it smoothly. The men were still in Bellwater. He needed the badge. He'd left his knife. None of them were true. The truth was that he'd spent 11 days in a damp town thinking about a chamber full of umbrellas, and about a voice that had been too tired to be cruel, when cruelty was the thing it was famous for. Somewhere, in 800 years of taking everything from everyone, it had looked at a boy with nothing, and chosen, just once, to take nothing at all. Wick had never in his life been on the receiving end of an exception. He found he couldn't stop turning it over. He climbed the path in the rain, walked into the cave and said, "It's me. I am aware. I brought something." The eye opened. "You brought something." Wick held it up, a spoon, plain pewter, bent at the handle, entirely worthless, which he'd taken off a market stall that morning, for no better reason than that it was nearest to hand when the impulse struck. "Rent," he said. for the alcove. I'm going to want it again, and I'd rather owe you than not." He'd braced to be laughed at, or eaten, or turned out. Instead, the dragon lifted its head fully off the coin, the first time, and looked at the spoon, and then at him, and was quiet long enough that it began to be uncomfortable. "In 800 years," it said at last, "some 11,000 people have come into this chamber. Nearly all of them came to take something from it." A slow, low sound, like distant stone shifting. Most of them, it is fair to say, regretted it. A very few came only to look. 2 came to draw it. It lowered its head back down, level with him. "Not one of them," said the dragon, "has ever brought anything in. It's a bent spoon." "I am aware of what it is." The eye closed. "Put it on the left slope, near your other rubbish, and do not make anything of this." He came back after that. Then he kept coming back. The pattern set itself so quietly that neither of them noticed its setting. Wick would come up the pass every week or so, sit in the alcove, and eat whatever he'd brought. And, more and more, whatever had been left there for him, which was never acknowledged by either party. A rabbit, usually. Once a whole cheese. "It was going to spoil," the dragon said, unprompted, from 40 feet away, apropos of nothing. "Didn't say anything. You were about to." And Wick would bring a thing, add it to the hoard, and then, because he'd worked out early what the actual currency was, go and find some object in that enormous wreckage and ask about it, because the dragon could not resist. That was the discovery that changed his life, and he made it in the first month. He'd picked up the 3-legged wooden horse and asked, mostly to be annoying, where it came from. And the dragon said it had no interest in discussing it, and then discussed it for 40 minutes. A carpenter's daughter, 1,100 miles south, 460 years ago. She'd carved it herself, and it had lost its 4th leg the same week, and she'd carried it up the mountain in a sack because she'd heard the dragon collected things, and had decided, at 7 years old, that this was the safest place in the world to put something you couldn't bear to lose. "You let her leave," said Wick. It wasn't quite a question. "I have let a handful leave," said the dragon, "in 800 years. She was one. She told me her whole plan on the way up the pass, out loud, to a creature she had every reason to believe would kill her, because she wanted the horse kept more than she wanted to be safe." A pause. "I have never been able to say precisely what it is that stays my hand. On the rare occasions it has stayed. But it is never the ones who come armed. It is always the ones who come having already given something up." It knew the girl's name. It said it out loud. Then it said it did not know why it had told him any of that, and that he should ask about something else or leave. So Wick asked about something else, and he understood, gradually, what the hoard actually was. It wasn't wealth. The dragon had no use for wealth. You cannot spend anything at the top of a mountain. It was a record. 800 years of things that had mattered enormously to somebody, and would have gone in a fire or a flood or a rubbish heap otherwise. And one creature with a memory big enough to hold every last one of them, sitting in the dark, keeping the whole thing on file, while the world outside chewed through its generations and forgot everybody. "The gold is the problem," the dragon said once. "The gold is what they see. They climb the mountain and they die for the gold, and not one of them in 8 centuries has ever climbed it for the umbrellas. I would, said Wick. You are here for the rabbit. I'm here for the umbrellas and the rabbit. Said the dragon. The change in Wick happened so slowly that Bellwater noticed before he did. He stopped taking things for what they'd fetch. He started taking them for what they were, and then, before long, stopped taking them at all, because he'd found that when he brought up something he'd lifted, and the dragon asked where it came from, he only ever had half a story. He knew where he'd got it, and never who'd had it before, and half a story, it turned out, was worthless to both of them. So he began, at 14, to do something no one who knew him would have believed. He began asking people about their things, buying them sometimes, with the last of his ill-gotten money, and then with money he'd earned doing honest work he was frankly bad at. Sitting in kitchens with old women in Bellwater, being told at length about a copper pan, carrying it up the mountain in a sack, and repeating the whole thing word perfect to a creature the size of a church, who listened to every word every time and never once admitted to enjoying it. He got a reputation, the boy who goes up the pass, the boy the dragon lets come back. It made him strange, and it made him watched, and eventually it made him a problem. The problem arrived when he was 17, in the shape of an expedition, the best funded in a century, a duke's son at its head, and 80 men behind him, and a great deal of chain. They came to Wick because everyone in Bellwater told them to, and they made him an offer that was, in strict terms, the largest ever made to anybody in the history of that town. Guide us in, show us where it sleeps, and take 1/10 of what comes down the mountain. 1/10 of that hoard would have bought Bellwater, twice over. Wick sat in the inn and listened to the whole thing, and thought about how much of his life he'd spent with nothing, and about how there had been a version of him, not 4 years back, a boy in a doorway doing arithmetic, who'd have said yes before the sentence was finished and been right to. And then he thought about the evenings. That was all. Just the evenings, the walk up the pass, the alcove, the fire the dragon lit for him and pretended it hadn't, a voice like a landslide telling him about a bell, and he thought about 80 men with chain going up a narrow pass, and about what always came back down it, sorted and stacked at the second waymarker. No, he said. He got a beating for it, which he'd expected, and they went up without him, which he'd also expected, and he took the goat track and got there first, and was standing in the mouth of the cave out of breath when the dragon opened its eye. They're coming, he said. 80, chain, the duke's son. The dragon regarded him. They offered you something, it said. Not a question. 1/10. 1/10 of this? The great head came up. And you refused it, and then you climbed my mountain in the dark, ahead of armed men, to tell me they were coming. The eye held him. Why? And Wick, 17, thin, and never much good at saying things out loud, opened his mouth and got nowhere at all and shut it again. The dragon looked at him a long moment. No, it said, quieter. You needn't. I know why. I have simply not heard the reason from anyone in a very long time. It rose, uncoiling, filling the chamber. Sit in the alcove, Wick. Cover your ears if you are wise. This part I have never once enjoyed, but I have never yet let it reach the people I have decided to keep. It went out past him into the daylight, which he had never seen it do, and the mountain shook, and Wick sat in the alcove with his hands over his ears and did not watch. It did not take long. It never did. The pass is a bad place to bring 80 men. When it came back in and settled into the coin with a sound like a beach, it was quiet for a while. Then it said, without any particular emphasis, "Ot." Wick looked up. "What?" "My name is Ot," said the dragon. "It was my mother's father's. The world calls me the sorrow of the 9 kings, and worse, and has good reason to, and I did not choose any of it. It is only that in 800 years no one has stayed alive long enough, or wished to know badly enough, to ask me what I would rather be called." Wick sat with that a while. "Ot," he said. "Do not," said Ot, "make anything of it." They had 11 years of it in the end, before the story in the ledger stops. And it stops in a particular place. Chosen, I think, because whoever wrote it out had 14 pages and used every line of the last one and then simply ended. It was a clear night near the end of a summer, and Wick was sitting in the mouth of the cave with his boots off, arguing about a jar of buttons. And Ot said, "Come here. I'm comfortable. Come here." So he came, and the dragon lowered its head, and then its shoulder, and put one enormous forelimb flat on the stone, and did not explain itself, and waited. It took Wick a full half-minute to understand. "No," he said. "I have not offered before," said Ot. "I will not offer again. I dislike being agreed with too quickly. It makes me suspicious of the agreement. I'll fall off." "Almost certainly. You'd catch me." "I would consider it," said Ot. "At length, while you fell." The great head turned, and the eye came round, and there was something in it that had not been there on that first wet night, 11 years before, and that had been arriving very slowly ever since, in a creature that had shown mercy to a handful of souls in 800 years, and had, at the very end of all that time, somehow found a way to show it the same person twice. Get on, Wick. So he climbed up, hand over hand, up a shoulder like a hillside, until he sat where the neck met the back, a ridge of scale in front of him to hold, small as a coin on all that dark green, the whole of the creature moving under him like something breathing at the bottom of the sea. Ot went out through the mouth of the cave, along the ledge, and stood at the edge of Aster's Reach with the whole northern country laid out below in the dark. The little lights of Bellwater, away down at the foot of the pass, the road running off south into nothing. "Hold on with your legs, not your hands," said Ot. "Your hands are pathetic." "Ot!" "And do not," said Ot, "make anything of this." And it stepped off the mountain. That's where the pages run out. Right there. A boy who'd had nothing at all and no one at all, and had walked up a mountain to die because of it, 1,700 feet up in the cold, clean dark, hanging on with his legs, with the wind taking the sound out of his mouth before he could even find out what it was going to be. Whoever wrote it down knew what they were doing, I think. Some things are better left in the air. There. I've read that ending a dozen times now, and I still catch myself turning the page as though there might be a 15th. I keep coming back to the girl with the wooden horse, the handful it let leave. It was never the armoured ones it spared, you'll have noticed. Never the ones who came to win. Always the ones who came having already set something down. I don't think that's an accident in the telling. I think whoever wrote it wanted us to understand that the boy walked up that mountain with empty hands and an emptier heart, and that this, of everything, was the one thing that Mountain had never learned how to refuse. And the hiding of it too. 14 pages, in the back of a book about barley. Somebody had a story they weren't sure the world would want and couldn't bear to burn. And so, they put it in the one place nothing ever gets thrown away from, and trusted the world to be dull enough to leave it be for a few 100 years. Which it was, right up until it wasn't. Now, the thunder's moved off east while we've been sitting here. You can hear it going if you listen, grumbling away over the far side of the meadow with somebody else's night to get to. Nothing more is going to happen tonight, dear insomniac. You've nothing to carry, nothing to hide, nothing to be clever about, and nowhere in the world you need to be. Sleep well. I'll leave the lamp lit, the way I always do. Good night.